most powerful one to have emerged in Caribbean scholarship is the Carnival and the Lime. The Carnival and informalism come from the same meaning area, and I spoke about the Carnival earlier. And informalism, that exemplifies creativity, but it is seen as being less transformational. Traditionally, the Lime is seen as the art of doing nothing. It is a celebration of the informal life of freedom and a life without restraint. We want to advocate an intra-metaphorical conversation, combining the Carnival with the Lime in HRD. We want to, on the surface, the Lime and informalism are not obvious foundations for transformation in the Caribbean. But what we're suggesting is that if you combine the creativity, the discipline, teamwork, and innovation that typifies the execution of the successful Carnival with the iconoclastic and spontaneity of the informal, that you will begin to tap into our transformational potential, and not only in the society, but in the microcosm in the business sector. So following Clegg, Hardy, and Nord, we recognize a certain fluidity of operations and a formation of organizational forms and malleability of organizational boundaries that we believe will allow for innovation. So our addition to the literature is the notion of transformational informalism. And what we're trying to do there is to understand how the self operates in the culture. We want to understand what it is that motivates Caribbean people. So we understand that there is a self-role involvement that allows people the latitude to express themselves. And as a metaphor, this is far more positive than seeing ourselves as a Nancy. So I just had a small diagram. You see the things that go in, the negatives of using Jamaica time, of informalism of the Lime, individualism, which we celebrate here, charisma that we believe in, and rebellion. But out of that, well, it's a juicer, out of that melting pot can come positive things like economic and social prosperity, transformational exchange, innovation and growth, and use of a creative economy, an economy based on our creative talents. So we go to the notion of metaphorical change. So while it is useful to know that it is possible for something to happen, it is even more important for us to understand how to manipulate it in order to incorporate it into our reality. So we need to understand how to move from the fairly static cultural metaphors of the generative and constitutive type toward the more dynamic personal narratives. So this is not a minor point, because if we think, again, of the whole Anansi thing, that black people are lazy, that they're thieves, and that they can't manage anything, can you think of that being the thinking of a bank manager if you go in to take a loan to begin a business? If there are three of us lined up here, there's an Indian Jamaican, well, four, Indian Jamaican, Chinese Jamaican, white Jamaican, and Olivene Thomas. I am going to be least likely to get that loan to begin my business if that is how a bank manager sees a black person in Jamaica. So this is why we have to change the way we think of ourselves and the way we project that onto other people. So we could move forward with that, but what would happen is that we get uneven development. We would get that there are some sectors of the society that would develop at the expense of others, and that is not sustainable. And of course, we're also not only into transformation, but into sustainability of our development. So in looking at metaphorical change, we see that the problems inherent in allowing our culture to be ruled by the static generative metaphors, that those can't be allowed to stand. So for us, fortunately, there is more dynamism at the personal level, at the individual narrative level. So we think that for the future, metaphorical change, that needs to be studied more closely so that we can understand the science and art of actually managing Caribbean people in the wider society, in the political sphere, but also in the organization when we appear there as workers. For organizations, it is for the Caribbean organizational leadership and management to grasp the relationship between the cultural metaphors that govern us and the self, and move to identify transformational metaphorical dimensions and to help to embed these meaningfully into organizational life and in ways consistent with individual narrative metaphors that we have in everyday life. Leaders must work at devising new techniques of management aimed at changing organizational settings into positive experiences. We can't just let change happen, it has to be managed. Because remember, as I say, the informal dominates the society. So we need to understand, is informalism a value that we hold the way other people would hold a value of the Protestant ethic, you know? If we as Caribbean people believe unconsciously that to be independent in our thinking and to work at our own pace rather than to subjugate ourselves to a group or an employer or somebody like that, if we believe that the way we operate is a sign of strength, then it would be better for persons who wish to run successful organizations to invest in finding new ways of harnessing those sorts of ingrained beliefs. We have to leverage that into developing an ethos of innovation rather than trying to train people to work in groups and to do the sorts of things that the management books, the contemporary management books are telling us are good for us. So leaders must identify the transformational dimensions of Caribbean metaphors and embed them in local Caribbean organizational life in ways that are consistent with the individual narratives. So for example, a manager in an organization could forego personal power and allow people to work in groups of their own choosing, but what he would retain is the process of evaluation, so that he would still say that the work has to be done, but it's how you choose to do it. So I'm not going to force you to be in a group, but I do expect quality work at the end. We need to begin to think of that. So that would mean that the manager who has worked hard, studied hard, done everything he has to do to time up, that he would have to give up some of his power. So that is the sort of thing that we would need to begin to think about in operating Caribbean organizations of the future. So, in closing, I just want you to think about the fact that transformational informality is a possibility if we recognize the value of informality to the people of the Caribbean and to the self. Thank you.